So today we are going to be reviewing Three Kingdoms, which is attributed to Lu Guanzhong. It's pretty thick. These are the thin Bible pages, so runs about 2,300 pages. It's about 3 parts fiction, 7 parts historical. This is how I've heard it described. I think it's pretty apt. And it covers the warring period following the fall of the Han Empire in, I think, about 180, late 180s AD to about 280 AD. So it's about 100 years of history. And it focuses on, in particular, the hero Liu Bei and his advisor Kong Ming are kind of centrally important. So there's like this 40-year span where maybe like 280 to 240, where most of the coverage of the book is, and then there's some towards the closer in the beginning and at the end. This book is a classic of Chinese literature. I'm not a Chinese lit expert. To my knowledge, it is the most important piece of literature in China. It was written somewhere around 14 to 1500 AD. It's not particularly clear, or there's like debate. I lack the scholarly academic type of background to really pick through all that. But it is commonly used as a means of, by various regimes have sort of tried to align themselves stylistically with Liu Bei as a means of appealing to the general populace. In it, there are a lot of themes that are important to Chinese culture, like filial piety, the mandate of heaven, like virtue, benevolence, meritocracy to some extent. There's a little bit of an interesting this is perhaps a bit of a tangent, but meritocracy and loyalty are two things that can be at odds with each other, because to be loyal is kind of to be nepotistic, and to be disloyal or according to ability is kind of be meritocratic. But the book itself focuses mainly on the heroes, and to some extent they are rather stylized. A particularly good example of this is Guan Yu, who is the sworn brother of Liu Bei, and he is venerated as a pseudo deity in Chinese history, or like Chinese culture. I don't know exactly the status, so I just use pseudo deity. If you go to mom and pop Chinese places, there's a hero, and they have like a statue of someone with a long beard, like down to their navel, and a crescent halberd, or not halberd, what's it called? I forget the name of the blade. It's got a long curved blade. That's Guan Yu. And I've seen him all over the place in mom and pop Chinese places. So, it focuses mainly on the warfare, as well as the virtue of the hero. In it, just very roughly, the warring states period following the fall of the Han Empire eventually consolidates into 3 kingdoms: Wu, Wei, and Shu. Liu Bei is the ruler of Shu, and he is generally contrasted, or the antagonist is Cao Cao or Cao Cao. Not 100% sure. I think Cao Cao is like the Americanized pronunciation, but Cao Cao is more correct. He's portrayed as the villain, and it's like, to the extent that one person is obviously good and another person's evil, it's a bit stylized. For example, there's historical evidence that like an inspector went to Liu Bei and was basically a corrupt official, and Liu Bei put the smackdown on him and beat him. And in the book, for example, there's another character who's close to Liu Bei who does it, so he doesn't get his hands dirty. Would be an example of some of the ahistorical stylization. But it covers that period. It's pretty important in Chinese culture, and the thing I think about a lot is like legitimacy for rule, where some people are considered legitimate and other people are considered illegitimate. It's and a lot of it concerns like what constitutes legitimacy in terms of virtue and like what you're allowed to do and like that sort of thing. Anyways, getting into the ratings, or one more thing. For me, I really like this book. It was a big part of like my childhood. I read it in middle school, largely because I really liked games that were based on this time period, which is why I read the book. I've come to really like the book, and it's like less about the games. It's like Dynasty Warriors and Romance of the Three Kingdoms are the game franchises. And so I read this several times in middle school. It's still the longest book I've ever read. It's like 2,300 pages. But getting into the ratings. For utility, I give it a 3.5. It's really hard to give it a high rating because I'm not sure how it's useful. It's useful for maybe conversation and also understanding Chinese culture to like some extent. But it being what I think is the most significant piece of Chinese literature is why it's scoring as high as it does on 3.5. I think that you're not gonna manage to peel too much use out of this other than that. But okay, for novelty, I gave it a 5. If you don't read this book, that's fine. I do think the reason why it scores as high as a 5 is because if you're in more Western culture, just I think being exposed to some ideas and stuff from the East is a bit useful and is probably something you haven't encountered before, so that's why it scores as high as a 5. But if you don't read it, it's not like you've lost anything really, which is, these are kind of like the two metrics I use for novelty, is are you really missing out if you don't read this? No, for this book. And is this something you probably haven't seen before? Yes, if you're, unless you've read Chinese lit, I guess. For entertainment, I gave it an 8. I really like this book. As far as classics go, you could kind of compare this to maybe like the Iliad or something like that. It reads way better than the Iliad does. But it's like stylistically somewhat similar, where it's like this kind of long epic that follows heroes. I couldn't get through all of the Iliad, so I guess I can't fully comment on that. But it does kind of have this grand scale type of thing. Also, a particular thing that I like is the characters you focus on the most, since it covers 100 years, they die. And so, and a lot of characters like follow a historical path, so characters you might not expect to die, when they died, just do, because that's what happened in history, which is, I like that in terms of like how the book reads, because there's a little bit, when you know a character can't die, it's not as thrilling, I guess. For style, I gave it a 6. It's fairly approachable, which is also why it has a 6 on readability. It is translated. Some of the ideas are a little bit clunky, some of the wording is a little bit clunky, but overall I think it's fairly well written. It probably is extremely well written in Chinese, and so I think that the translator did a good job. Like, it's not like super choppy. There are some spots where there's just like spelling errors, which has more to do with the editor. There's actually a lot of spelling errors. That has more to do with the editor than the translation a lot. I think like a lot of names are just misspelled. In a couple spots it's actually really confusing because the misspelling names a different character that's like somewhat close to the scene, and it's just like a little bit confusing, but not that big a deal. Overall, style and readability I think is pretty good, or just like solid. It's difficult for me to rate this though because I haven't read another Chinese book that's been translated, so maybe this is just way better, or like take this rating with a grain of salt in terms of style and readability. Although style-wise, it's like way better than Western classics. For interest, I gave it a 6.5. I find it pretty interesting. I think the time period's interesting. I think when you're looking at the types of characteristics that are considered virtuous in Eastern culture versus Western culture. There's quite a bit of a divide. And it's like, it's kind of hard to put my finger on exactly the nature of the divide. I think it's I think that one way to look at it is that Eastern culture is just generally more communal and Western culture is more individualistic. And I have another video in here somewhere where I think the name of it is Meritocracy is Disloyalty, Loyalty is Nepotism, something like that, where Eastern cultures just in general tend to be more communal or communally oriented. This is, you can actually attribute this to the type of grain that they use, where they engage in rice paddy farming, which requires a lot more communal effort relative to Western societies that do wheat farming, which is a lot more individualistic. But you get like the type of heroism that you get from Three Kingdoms is a lot more service oriented. Like the strongest or the most hyped up character, I guess, is Kong Ming or Zhuge Liang, which is Liu Bei's advisor, and his character is entirely engaged in service, and a lot of what's emphasized is his service and how loyal he is to his ruler. And so, whereas you have something like, I guess to use the Iliad example, although I know the story, but I haven't like read through the whole book. Like Achilles is like, all about himself, and he gets in spats with Agamemnon, and generally it's more about personal glory. And so like the heroes in Three Kingdoms are like, so the like one of the most heroic characters in Three Kingdoms like risks his life to save Liu Bei's son, and like charges through like an entire army. And so like this is something Achilles might do, but Achilles would be doing it for glory or vengeance for the killing of Patroclus, and Zhao Yun would be doing it because he's trying to save this baby child of his ruler. So it's a lot. It's hard to like quite like, a lot of stuff is like similar in terms of like the heroics or the skill or like that sort of stuff, but in a lot of ways where the motivation's coming from tends to be more communally oriented in this book, as opposed to like individualistic in Western books, where the hero themselves is perhaps pedestalized a lot more rather than the hero's virtues, which is kind of what happens in Three Kingdoms. So, overall score of a 5.83. As far as recommendations go, I would recommend this book to anyone who is somewhat interested in Chinese culture, that also wants a story to read, and is not afraid of a 2,000-page book, I suppose. Like, it reads fairly well. It's not, like, long and arduous. It reads pretty good. It's very focused on warfare and that sort of stuff. It's not as focused on relationships, I guess. So if you wanted a more relationship-focused book, I'm sure you could find something in Chinese lit that would be better. But if you were looking for, like, kind of this old-school classic feel, I guess, this seems like a good choice. To my knowledge, it's, like, the biggest book. And there's, like, I think there's, like, the big 5 for Chinese lit, and this is, like, number 1 of those. Anyways, as far as discussion question goes, does anyone have experience with other books of Chinese lit? I've been thinking about getting something like maybe Outlaws of the Marsh or something else that is kind of in the vein of Chinese literature, but I'm not sure what I want to get. I also might want to get something more contemporary. So if anyone has any suggestions in that vein, they'd be very appreciated. And have a good one.